I was born in Kuwait, and I lived in Kuwait until the age of 14 years old, after which I migrated to Australia with my parents. During my life in Kuwait, we basically lived among an array of communities, and we never had issues in as far as school of thoughts are concerned. In fact, my parents lived in an environment which was a mixed environment. And my father's experience in Kuwait involved basically many friends from different communities: Iraqis, Lebanese, Palestinian, Jordanians, and even Kuwaitis, and Iraqis, obviously. I grew in a household where my father was very much for unity among Muslims. So we never heard anything to do with Sunni or Shias at all. We were Muslims, and that was good enough for all the members of the family. But my father was a very interesting person, that he used to love to engage in debates that involved people talking about different school of thoughts, differences in opinion. But he would always come to the forefront and basically try to have a reconciliatory tone in all of the discussions that he had. And in the course of saying these things, he had an experience himself. He had an experience where he witnessed two Iraqis fighting. And in the fight, my father heard one of them actually abusing Imam Ali, salawatullah wa salam alayhi. My father being a Sunni, but he took offense, and he basically jumped into the fight, trying to, initially he did not try to break the fight, he actually went against the guy who was abusing Imam Ali. And in the course of the fight, the person who was basically being put down, he asked my father, "You should know why I did abuse Imam Ali." So my father gave him the benefit of the doubt. He said, "Yes, tell me what happened." He said, "Well, the other Iraqi guy abused the first Khalifa." So my father said, "Is that a justification? I mean, if the first person was Jahil, let's say in inverted commas, you don't reciprocate and you abuse Imam Ali, because Imam Ali is a figure you can't abuse." So from that moment onward, my father told me a story which was extremely fascinating. He went to Najaf, and when he went to Najaf, he asked for the highest authority of the hierarchy in Najaf, and he was basically told to go and speak to the marja of the time then, who was known as Ayatollah Muhammad Hussein al-Kashif al-Ghata, who was contemporary to Ayatollah Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim. So my father says, I went inside the shrine of Imam Ali, and I approached the Ayatollah, and I asked him, what is the situation with Muslims? I mean, why do we have these issues and differences? And when he spoke to the Imam was so open-minded, and again, he was so reconciliatory in his approach about, relationship between Muslims, that my father, after that particular encounter with the Ayatollah, could not believe that there are differences between the school of thoughts that we should fight about. So who's going to convince my father now that the Shias are an outcast, that the Shias are not Muslims, that the Shias are not a group or a community to be trusted, or even to claim that they are not Muslims, right? So from that moment onward, that actually enhanced even and further made my father adamant not to create that sense of differentiation between the school of thoughts, at least in our upbringing as children in the household. Then we moved to Australia after that, and I was at the age of 14. When we moved to Australia, I joined a group, and that group was known as Jama'atul Tabligh. It's a very well-known group. And the concept of that group basically involves people going around houses, door knocking at Muslim houses, inviting them to come to the mosque. I found it a very fascinating idea. And I joined them. And I joined them for almost 3 or 4 years. By then, the revolution started in Iran. So I went to the hierarchy of the Jama'at al-Tabligh, because basically their concept is what? Is to reinstate the Islamic Khilafah by educating the masses. Eventually, if you educate the masses and you bring the masses back to in line with their faith, then you are preparing the whole society to be Islamic. And therefore, the leadership will turn Islamic by virtue of the fact that the society now is Islamic. So I seized the opportunity, being naive enough to believe that everyone thought like me, that there are no issues, no differences. And I said to the hierarchy, you know, guys, we should now unite with these people, because they have already declared a government that seems to be Islamic, or at face value they are calling for Islamic values. So why don't we join them? And to my shock and surprise, the answer I got basically shook my entire system, because I was raised in that environment of not differentiating between Muslims. The first answer I got back, we can't do that because they are kafirs. So my whole approach basically to the idea of we are Muslims was shattered in front of my very own eyes from the answer that I got. So it was a struggle for me to accept such an answer. So I decided to begin my search and my quest to find even more about the Shia school of thought. By then, I was almost 17, 18 years old. I approached one of our local Shia imams, who was the second Shia imam of the largest mosque in Sydney called Al-Zahra Mosque. And I spoke to him at length, and basically our dialogue lasted for more than 6 to 7 years. And in the end, it was like going forward and backward, me asking him questions, he's answering me, and so on and so forth. At the end, or in the end, he gave me 2 books for the same author, Sayyid Abdul Hussein Sharaf al-Din al-Amili from South Lebanon. And one book is called Al-Muraja'at, which is translated in English, I think, as The Right Path or The Straight Path. But the other book, which was written by Sayyid Abdul Hussein Sharaf al-Din, which I personally believe was a much more important book than Al-Muraja'at, is a book by the title An-Nas wal-Ijtihad, which basically, if I'm going to translate it literally, it would sound like the text versus the opinion of the companions. The text being the Quran. The idea of the book is what? Highlighting how many times the companions of the Prophet, through their own ijtihad, went actually against the text of the Quran. That was something that was such an enlightenment for me. It was like nirvana. It was like reaching the very, core of the truth of what is the actual problem between the 2 schools of thoughts. In as much as, the other school of thought says that the Shias takes the level of the Imams to such a high level of infallibility, I found also that after reading that book, they took the status of the companions to that level of infallibility as well, where you can't even question what they did, despite the fact that in many situations, they actually went against the text of the Quran. And to go against the text of the Quran, meaning to go against, the whole revelation, the whole message, something that we never heard about, something that we were never exposed to, something that we could not even question in our upbringing at school, at least, when we were taught, for example, about the dynasty of Bani Umayyah and the dynasty of Bani al-Abbas, and so on and so forth. You take it as gospel, you learn it, you memorize it, and you believe in it as if it is a creed and a credence that you can't question. Based on that, I was not convinced. And the more I read, the more I became more convinced that there is something missing in our school of thought. The icing on the cake that tipped the scale is that when I met another Shia person who gave me as a gift Sahifa Sajjadiyya. Sahifa Sajjadiyya was by far the book that made me realize that after truth there is only falsehood. So if you marginalize the truth, you will not find, extra large truth or double X truth. You're going to find falsehood. So I decided to myself, time is now available to me. It's the best opportunity for myself to take the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt as my school of thought. And I did. I accepted it with an open arm, and I began to question everything I was taught, right from my childhood in school all the way until I commenced my studies in Al-Azhar University as well, which was in Egypt. To such an extent that when I commenced my studies in Al-Azhar University, I sensed some sort of an animosity to question our history, to question what happened among the companions, to even question the fact that the master, who is sometimes the killer, and the master, who is sometimes the one killed, are both called masters. Doesn't make sense. Rationality does not accept that the killer and the killed be both masters at the same time. It's like saying day and night exist simultaneously at the same time, which doesn't make sense, And so many things I had to question and to basically cast my prejudice aside in order to find the truth and follow the truth. I'll give you one incident that I often used to ask myself about, and without a word of a lie, it took me 10 years to find the source behind that riwayah. It is a simple narration that is mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim about the fact that it's a riwayah mentioned on the authority of the wife of the Prophet Aisha, where she says that the Prophet sent a battalion of companions and he appointed a leader on that group of Muslims. That person who was appointed as the group leader was not named throughout the riwayah or throughout the narration. But there was something very unique about that person, that every time he would lead prayer with the other Muslims, he would always read Qul Huwallahu Ahad. So the group said to him, "You don't know anything else from the Quran except this surah? When we go back to Medina, we will complain to Rasulullah about you." He said, "Suit yourselves." So they did. When they went back to Medina, they approached the Prophet ﷺ and they told him about what happened. So the Prophet said, "Did you ask him why? Did it ever occur to you why he's reciting Qul Huwallahu Ahad?" They said, "No, Ya Rasul." He said, "Then go and ask him." So the actual companions went and asked the person, and he had an answer. He said, "Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described himself throughout this ayah, and I love to communicate with my God on the basis of the way he described himself." So they went back to the Prophet, they relayed the answer. So the Prophet made a comment. He said, "Then tell him the one that he loves also loves him." End of the story. Until now, there is no mention of who that person is. So I started researching. It took me 10 years until I found that this riwayah is speaking about Imam Ali. So the question that came to mind, why? Why the marginalization of Ahlul Bayt in Sunni sources? That was one of the biggest issues that I faced in my